Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of MPL. This is going to cap off the fourth episode of the Merit series, and today we are joined by two very, very special guests. I want to open up the floor to them so that they can introduce themselves. Either of you guys can go ahead.
Go ahead, Sheikh Aarij.
I was gonna say, Sarrah, you go ahead first.
Okay, ladies first. So my name is Sarrah Lawendy. I have lived in London for quite some time. So for the past, I would say 7.5 years. Prior to that, I was in London. I did my master's here and then lived here after I got married and had my first two children. Alhamdulillah, we moved out west after that. My background educationally is in education. So my undergrad is in rhetoric and professional writing. And then I did a bachelor's of education, and then I did a master's of education. And kind of my focus there and my thesis was, why do parents choose to homeschool? What are the challenges of public education? So I'm very passionate about education and schooling, and have tried, to be a part of the community from a grassroots perspective. I currently sit on the board of the Muslim Association of Canada, on the national board, and I consider myself someone who, is very passionate about their kids, about cooking, and supporting our youth. I love what you guys are doing, so I'm really happy that we can be here to help you guys out with this. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sheikh Aarij, you're up.
All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Aarij Anwer. I currently am the interim imam at the London Mosque. I've also with that, I am the Arabic, Quran, and Islamic Studies coordinator at the London Islamic School, where Sister Sarah's kids were. One of them has graduated, Maryam, mashallah, and the other is still. There were two others that were there last year. Alhamdulillah. My background is I actually studied computer science in Waterloo. That was in 2003, and I graduated 2008. Right, I worked in tech for a little bit as a as a programmer and software developer, analyst. Then I quit all that and went to Egypt to study Arabic and memorize Quran and learn Islam. I was doing that before I went, but on a part-time basis. But then I kind of took the dive, so to say, right in the deep end. And alhamdulillah, I was really blessed to meet some amazing teachers, and including my teacher who I've studied with since that time. I completed a degree from a university in Malaysia called Al Madina International University. That was mostly through correspondence, and it was all in Arabic. It was actually quite difficult for me because I was still learning the language and how to read and everything. But alhamdulillah, I had my teacher who supported me and coached me throughout and whatnot. And I finished that. Then I enrolled in. I finished also around that time my Quran memorization, alhamdulillah. Then enrolled in a bachelor's of education program at UFT because I felt that was something that I would end up in the Islamic da'wah field, right, so to say, right. And University of Toronto, I did the B.Ed from there, and after that worked a little bit with a few organizations. Some of them were more like North America wide, like Bayina. Some of them were local masajid in the city of Toronto. And then around 2018, I ended up here in London, alhamdulillah, wearing a bunch of different hats throughout the course of my time here. But I think now what I'm wearing now, not this hat literally, but figuratively, is what I am. Alhamdulillah. And I'm really also very honored to be here with Sister Sarah, who's I learned a lot about her by her introduction, alhamdulillah, but I've learned more about her from her kids, alhamdulillah, the tarbiyah of her kids. And very happy to have both of you, Yasmin and Faizan, be with you here in this podcast. I've seen you in the in the lectures and the MSA weekly classes and the QA sessions and whatnot. So it was really nice for now to be on this podcast, right? And be a part of this. So Jazakumullah khairan for having me.
Well, yeah, we're very, very happy to have the both of you. And given your extensive education and knowledge, we do hope you don't school us too much, but and are able to offer some really valuable insight to anyone who's listening, any young Muslims potentially thinking of marriage, because apparently that's all we think about nowadays. So yeah. And for anyone who hasn't got the gist yet, the fourth episode is going to be focused more on sort of compiling all of the information from our first three episodes and having a conversation with Sheikh Aarij and Sister Sarah to sort of understand what they think from a more like Islamic perspective, so that, you know, we're not imposing our opinions on you without it having the the needed contextual understanding of what is the right way to do something, as opposed to just because person X is doing so, that must mean that it is correct or it is wrong, right? So with that being said, the first sort of topic I wanted to cover was how should young Muslims look at marriage and what should the objective of marriage be? So some people go into it wanting to find a best friend. Some people go into it with the sole purpose of having offspring and having kids. Some people go into it so that they can become closer to their deen. So what really should be a person's objective when thinking of marriage?
So, what is the purpose or what should be the objective of marriage? I think that it's really important when answering these questions to really take a bigger step back. And I think you really have to ask yourself, what is the bigger purpose in general? Because the way I understand marriage, and I really think that this is very much aligned with the Islamic understanding, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us this beautiful union and relationship as, a means to help us with our greater goal. And I think oftentimes what ends up happening is that people are confused about, or they lack clarity about what their real purpose or their real goal is. And so other decisions get affected by that lack of clarity. And so when I say step back, I often, ask my children, like, what do you think your purpose is? Do they have a proper understanding? Do we have a proper understanding? As young adults, do we know what we're doing here? And when we take a look at the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put us on this earth, with a very real purpose, we have this understanding that everything that was created around us was created for us to help us fulfill that purpose, right? So this example is actually illustrated in the example of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. So if you look at the example when the Prophet ﷺ first received revelation, he became very distraught, right? By this, the magnificence, the confusion, everything that was happening around the revelation. And where did he go, right? He went back to his wife. And it was that relationship that helped ground him in when he was facing certain things in his life. And I really see marriage as this, blessing and this mercy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us, and he talks about it subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran as one of his signs, right? Is that you have this person that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to you and, blesses you with, that I believe is meant to help you achieve that bigger purpose or that bigger goal. So when you ask, what is the objective of marriage? Yeah, it's beautiful. Your spouse ought to be your best friend. That's a beautiful thing. You ought to find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he puts between you mawadda and rahma, this love and this mercy. And there's this analogy of litaskunu ilayha, that you have this second, this home, that you find this peace, this nest within one another. Those are all very beautiful things that really are meant, they're tools that support the bigger purpose, in my opinion. And so if you have clarity, I think, on what your purpose is, it's much easier to have clarity on what the purpose of marriage is. That's just my kind of take. Of course, Sheikh Aarij, please jump in.
Inshallah. No, that's awesome, mashallah. Jazakallah khair, Sister Sarah. That was very, very profound. The If you just to add to her point about the Prophet Ali Sallallahu and he was in that situation of uh, he was very overcome by the moment of the first revelation, and you could make an argument, like many have done, that that was really the only time he was overcome by the emotion, by the moment, right? Like it was too much for him to handle. After that, every moment, as difficult as it was, he knew how to handle it, sallallahu, right? Even in the difficulty of battle or facing like a life or death situation, he was calm about it, and whatnot. But that was the moment, the first time he was really unsure, right? Sallallahu, and for him, he found comfort in his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, our mother, and she was not unsure. She was sure when he was unsure, right? So it tells you about how amazing that relationship was, and really that's in a way a blueprint of of uh of that relationship, right? Like of the relationship of a husband and a wife, of a couple. That's how it should be, that you're there to uh be there for each other in all ways. Their intimacy is there, the support is there emotionally. You can trust this person and they can trust you, you can rely on each other. So all that you can see, and the glimpse of it from just the statement of Khadija radiallahu anha when she said to him that "Kalla la yukhzika Allahu abadan," Allah will never disgrace you, and then she gives him reasons why he would never be disgraced, and then she takes him to Waraqa, her cousin, who reinforces what she was saying, but more from a scriptural angle. She's providing such comprehensive support to the Prophet sallallahu, and he also would after passing away, uh, he would, that love didn't end when he died, radiallahu anha, right? It continued afterwards. He would send gifts to her family, and he would be think about those moments and his wife, and he would be overcome by emotion, right? So and love. So that's an amazing blueprint. Just two of the points here, like look at also like the person who narrates that whole narration to us, that's found in Sahih Bukhari, for example, is actually Aisha radiallahu anha. She's the one who narrates the hadith of the first revelation, and the words of Khadija are narrated to us by Aisha. And at that point, Aisha radiallahu anha was not even born, actually, right? She was not even there in the world. So it tells you that the Prophet ﷺ, later on in his life, when he's married to Aisha, he and her would have these conversations, right? That's the way she would know. And the details of that conversation, she knows them intimately well. The other Sahaba know some of the details in other narrations. She has the full picture, right? So you could see that they would have these conversations. He would be sharing his experiences with her, and then she's then sharing it on with the others, right? So it also gives you a glimpse of how the life of Aisha radiallahu anha was with the Prophet ﷺ, that they would have these conversations. And that's something that's really critical for a couple. Like you would like your spouse should be the one that you should feel comfortable speaking to, and they should feel comfortable as well speaking to you, right? That is very, very critical. One last thing is, you look at our father Adam alayhi salam, right? This is something I mentioned in the interfaith panel, you might remember. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam. Adam alayhi salam was in Jannah, right? He's got everything. He's enjoying himself. But he asked for a spouse in Jannah. If Adam alayhi salam wants a spouse in Jannah, and needs that support and the companionship to complete him, right? In Jannah, where everything is perfect, imagine the rest of us in the world. How much more are we in need of that companionship? So that is something that really is how we should view it. It's a completion of a person in many, many ways.
Right. And so, yeah, I know a lot of young Muslims like joke about this, but it is really like half your deen, right? Like it is put in our religion. And I really agree with your point on like self-introspection and finding out what you stand for in this world before you actually involve someone else in your life. Because without that, if your priorities change, then they're, affecting other people as well, and potentially your family members, extended family, and children possibly as well. So I really like that, and I hope whoever is listening to this and is thinking of getting married does take some time to do some self-reflection and really understand what they see as the purpose of them being here, and then think of anything going forward. um I wanted to move on to a little bit more of like the process of finding someone, right? Yasmin and I, we each did an episode separately for men and women. And I wanted to start out by sharing some of the thoughts that some of the young Muslim men had. And then I'll pass it over to Yasmin so she can share some of the thoughts that the young Muslim women had. And then Sister Sarah and Sheikh Aarij can sort of comment on it, perhaps say what some of them should be avoided, encouraged, etc. And so when we were looking, when I was talking to some of my friends, there was a little bit of, I don't want to say disconnect, but disagreement on parental involvement, and as well as emotional attachment, which we'll hit upon a little bit later. But in terms of parental involvement, I personally am someone who believes that the parents should know about you and like this, whoever your potential is, from the get-go. And the reason for that is because if your parents know, then they can right off the bat sort of tell you whether they approve of this person or not. And so, for instance, if I'm thinking of somebody who's from a different culture, if my parents right off the bat say, you know what, there's going to be a lot of friction if you bring someone from a different culture, then I'm avoiding getting them involved. And then 3 or 4 months later, having literally breaking their heart just because my parents don't know about it. Right. Whereas some of my other friends, they were like, that sort of makes sense. But if you look at it in sort of the modern context where, as Muslims, we're not allowed to date, right? And so if you are talking to somebody, it's better that you and that person sort of understand if there is chemistry between the two of you before involving the parents, just so then you two can better assess if you two are compatible for each other or not. Because in certain cultures, as soon as the parents get involved, for some reason, it's perceived as done deal, like you two are getting married. And so there was a little bit of confusion as to when the parents should get involved, to what degree they should get involved, how much they should talk to each other, and how much they should get to know one another. And so that was sort of the main takeaway from my from when I was chatting with some of the guys. Yasmin, you can comment on what some of the female singles said.
Yeah, mine was very similar as well. Um, one female suggested that, if the guy wants to talk to me, I'm gonna give him my dad's number and email, and he can just go talk to him straight. I'm not gonna have any contact with him. And then someone else suggested that, no, I'm going to talk to them for 2 to 3 months just to make sure, because I know for a fact that if I involve my parents right away, then it's just gonna they're gonna think it's a done deal, and that I've chosen him. And I don't want them to think that. I want to have a better understanding, because they don't understand the culture that I've grown in here. And then another individual was like, well, not this wasn't really in the conversation, but just other general conversations I've had. Some people were like, would like to be in a I'd like to know them for like a year or two, because you can't tell who a person really is just within 2 months. So yeah.
Yeah, and to sort of add on to that, like a lot of people, including like some of my own like family members, there's even discourse between my family members as to like what is the right way to go about it. And I think like some of them are like, yeah, you should get to know them a little bit more organically without you telling them you're interested in them, because once you tell them you're interested in them, they might put up this facade, or like they might put their best foot forward, which isn't actually a true representation of who they are as people, and then their real character will be masked because they are interested in you and they want to be on your good side, so to speak. Right. So I know there's no right or wrong answer to this. Perhaps there is, or maybe I just don't know. But yeah, Sister Sarah, what do you think about this little bit of discourse?
So, this is really loaded for me because I understand the challenge, because I was born and raised here. And I especially appreciate the challenge the more I interact with people, because for my, you know, blessing, alhamdulillah, I had parents who were, separated a lot of culture from religion, who were, people who modeled good Islamic sort of understanding. So, in our house, my brother is married to Yemeni, my other brother is married to half Russian, half Palestinian, my Lebanese. We were allowed to marry anything. There was no restriction. If the person was a God-fearing, individual, that's what mattered, even more than education, more than anything else. So I can appreciate that, if I had this dilemma, I would just talk to my parents, right? Like this would be a normal, natural kind of conversation in our household. But I do appreciate that a lot of people feel that they have unreasonable parents, or their parents won't understand where they're coming from, or their parents have a completely different mindset, or they're looking with different lenses, than the ones that you're looking at. There are a few things that I'll say, because I don't think that there's a one answer that fits all. And I caution everyone from, trying to fit into a box of, this is, or a prescription of this is exactly how it ought to be. I think that what's important is to stick to our principles. Like, that's the first thing, right? So if you can find a way to organically meet someone, quote unquote, organically meet someone without transgressing a boundary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that's great. By all means, do it. If that's what works for you, and you feel it's more natural, and you want to make sure, I'm working in the MSA with this person, and I'm on the same committee, and I'm trying to understand, how they think, or what are their views on different things, that's great. I think where we have to be careful is going back again to that purpose. I want to achieve something pure, and I want the barakah from Allah, and I want something good, but I do it in the wrong way. And so I have to ask myself, like, what will come out of that situation? What will the outcome be? And it's really interesting, because I was reading on the Gottman Institute, and he's considered like the couples guru. One of the number one predictors for divorce is how things started, right? And so, subhanAllah, it's really interesting, because we have to understand that there's a certain blessing, and there's a certain this beautifying of our relationships that comes purely from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that comes when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with us. So I think, like, what I like to do is just make sure that people understand, and this is at the core of my belief, of my relationship with my husband, my relationship with my siblings, my relationship with people, is that first and foremost, I am in a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I have to first make right. I have to ensure that I'm following, what I believe is expected of me, what I believe is right. And then I can worry about, will my parents approve of this? Or am I going to really like her? Or is she going to mix well with my family? Like, I think that's the first principle that needs to be in place. And I think the second thing, and I like to say this because it's my experience as a parent, and it's my experience with parents who appear to be unreasonable, is that at the end of the day, at the very core of every parent is love for their child. And they want happiness for their child. And I know that it may not appear that way sometimes. And I know that some parents, pull out the stick, and if you marry her, I'll never talk to you again. If you even think about this culture, oh, don't you know these people? I met a brother from this country and they're all the same. I understand that these are the things that we may hear sometimes. And that's why, I really believe that what you said about bringing parents into the conversation early on in the game. And I think it should sometimes, Faizan, like how you say it to your parents, not so much what you're saying. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, some kids get rejected or their parents turn away, and it's because of the way that we're speaking to them. It's not necessarily what we're saying. So my advice is, as best as you can, remember that this relationship is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and don't try to do something good by doing bad things or wrong things along the way. Like, as best as you can, keep the water pure, right? Don't impurify it. And parents, I think we have to cut them some slack. I think we have to understand that there are natural emotions that are going to come with our children getting married. Like, I already have heart palpitations thinking, like, Like my daughter, Maryam, will be like, Mama, I'm 14, stop talking. I'm like, what am I going to do when you leave me? Like like as parents, this is like, you've been our lives for the past, 20 something years. It's difficult, right? So you have to cut your parents some slack and give them some time to absorb the situation, to think about it. If your parents are completely unreasonable, then you involve an ally. You involve a sheikh. You involve someone that they respect, that uncle that your dad will listen to or your mom respects, and you bring them into the conversation and into the situation. But that's kind of how I feel things should progress. And I really do respect brothers and sisters who try their best to adhere to this. I recognize that sometimes things don't go the way they ought to go. And it's just like anything else in our life. When we make a mistake, that's the rule in our house, you fix it, right? We recognize we did something wrong. We try to step away from the sin that we believe we're doing. We make istighfar because we're in that relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we try again. We try to figure out, how do I do this the right way? So that's kind of I don't know if I fully answered your question, but
I don't
that's.
know. Sheikh Aarij, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, that was really awesome. Thank you, Sarah. I think just one addition would be that the qualifier the whole time here is like the parents are reasonable, right? The parents are reasonable, and like alhamdulillah, like I'm blessed with parents who are very reasonable, and I would, you know, I didn't have a difficulty convincing myself that I'm short-sighted. I can't see the whole picture, and they're actually the ones who have like the bigger picture in mind, right? And alhamdulillah, like that's something that is a huge blessing. But there are unfortunately many situations that I come across, particularly in my role, where really the parents are being extremely unreasonable, right? And they're being unreasonable to the point of like it's almost become oppressive towards their children, and that's a really difficult place to be in, right? And anybody who's in that situation, you can like my du'as are for that person, because that's such a tough place to navigate, right? um and in the case of, if your parents are reasonable people and they're that they are doing right by you, right? I would actually say it depends when you want to involve your parents. Like, I would err on the side of caution and involve them when I feel that, okay, this could be something, right? Because I can trust them, right? And they have, I don't like when we say, oh, our parents don't understand the culture. They actually, I think they do understand it. Like, maybe they don't understand the intricacies of it, but like there's a perspective there that they have that we don't definitely have, right? Like, we have to respect that. There's a bit of wisdom there. So I would involve them when I feel this could be something, and then it goes from person to person. When would that be, right? uh I don't know if it should be the very first time or the second time. That really is case by case. The real problem is when the parents are not reasonable. Like, they're saying, no, you cannot ever think about getting married to that culture or to that particular individual, and there's no actual justifiable reason for that. Like, there is no like uh Islamic reason or logical reason to
So
say that, right?
where do you find yourself? Like, what do you do in those situations when you're finding that this is happening more and more, that parents are unreasonable? Like, what do you find yourself advising? Sorry, Faizan, I came in and
No.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be a conversation. So
Yeah.
feel free to jump in whenever.
how do you feel you're advising like youth to move forward in these kind of situations?
Yeah. So, like, the frequency of it, I think, is like undetermined. I think it's like isolated incidents. It's not like every certain frequency I see a case. It's just they're all like isolated, and they come from time to time, right? uh what I find is that you go through, like you said, like a respected adult, a respected elder, an ally, someone who can convince the parents to see some reason. But often, even in that situation, it's very difficult for a like say a girl to find an ally against her, or an ally to support her against her father, for example, because her brothers are not interested in doing this. She doesn't really have any uncles in the country who are supportive of that. The imam, the dad will just like brush him off as you know whatever, like not consider so much or anything from that person. So the worst case scenario, right? Let's talk about the worst case scenario here. Is that person, that father loses the right to be a guardian, right? A father is a guardian of his daughters. I'm speaking specifically about girls here because with women particularly, this is something that I've seen come across. Like the parents are being extremely unreasonable with the daughter. Um, maybe it's the other way too, but I haven't personally encountered that. Um, if it goes to the point where it becomes oppressive and extremely unreasonable, then like according to the majority of scholars like Imam Ahmad and the rest, they said this person has lost that title of being a guardian, and the girl can proceed without his approval. Now I say this with like really like buyer beware, don't like, this is
Right.
not the immediate thing you jump to, you
Right.
see. But this is something that's part of the deen. Like Imam Ahmad goes very far in this. He's like, this person can never lead salah, and this person's shahada witness cannot be accepted because he's oppressing his own kids, right? Uh, of course, there has to be some due process that has to be followed before you arrive at that conclusion. What that is varies case to case, but there has to be something. This can't be like the default conclusion a person jumps to. But that is there in the worst case scenario, where you know what, I can't spend the rest of my life waiting for my dad to change his mind,
Right.
right? And now I have to move on, and that's something that's it's there, right?
Yeah.
What do you do in cases where for example, like let's say a parent is like for example, like let's say a child is actually like if you won't listen, then I'm gonna have to go seek support somewhere else. And the parent's like, well, how dare you think of seeking so-called support from someone else when I'm the one that supports you. Why are you being so selfish? And you're gonna ruin my name in the community just for a guy. Like, what do you say to that? And then also they threaten to take away your possessions, like your car, your laptop, your phone. Like, what do you do in that case?
Mm. That's a parent who's seen many Pakistani dramas and Bollywood movies. They're pulling out the lines. The child is left speechless.
Like, full on isolation. You have nowhere to go. Who do you talk to? What do you do? Like, you like at this point you want to run away, but you can't run away.
Yeah. Sorry. You wanna say something? You were saying something? Yep.
Yeah, I don't know, Yasmin, like I really hate to make these situations, I feel like they're case by case. I feel like we have to understand that each case is different. So again, I think this goes back to what Sheikh Aarij said, like, alhamdulillah, our deen is so complete that if a parent, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that he has forbidden oppression on himself. So he orders us not to oppress each other, not to oppress others, and not to accept oppression, right? So if again, it is to the point where, there's no reason that's given of why somebody shouldn't pursue this person or pursue this culture, and you're just find yourself in these boxes of restrictions that keep getting tighter and tighter. I agree with what Sheikh Aarij said, and it goes again back to deen. What does Islam tell us to do in this situation? And I think we have to understand that sometimes, what I've seen is the flip of it too, Yasmin. Like, I've seen that there are reasons that the parents give that are valid and that you ought to consider. And what ends up happening is the child too is kind of, tunnel vision. This is the only person I can marry. My heart will never be the same again. I will love no one but this person. No, you will love another person. And there is a reason that your parents are saying this isn't a compatible, sort of fit for you, not just, let's say, the family. So I feel like, again, Yasmin, like we really have to advise each other to look at our individual cases. And if in fact, bring someone you trust in who's objective, say to them, this is the situation. Sheikh Aarij, my parents are saying this is what I'm saying. What do you advise me with? And if the advice at that point is to get that intervention, I think you should seek it. Like, I don't think you should be stuck in a situation. I have a friend who I feel very sad for, who, came from, and this exists in the Arabic culture. I'm not picking on the Pakistani culture at all. Especially like I've seen it in London. Like you can only marry from this village, or this, he has to be a Sayyid, or it has to be this name, right? And people feel very suffocated and trapped. And she married according to what her parents wanted, and rejected all of these great guys that came for her. And I do believe that the Prophet ﷺ's promise is true, that when you leave something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah grants you better. In this specific situation, this sister was continuously, turning away these religious great guys, and she ended up in this sort of miserable situation. Alhamdulillah, now it's better with a new person, a much better situation. But I think there is a point, Yasmin, like you are an individual, you have to trust yourself too. Like, we have to trust ourselves. Like if you feel that you're being reasonable and this is a good person, and your parents are being completely unreasonable, then use the forms of intervention that are there. That's what I would advise. And I'm sorry for anyone who's really going through that. It's really unfortunate. I'm sure you feel the same way, Sheikh Aarij, that we're in, our youth are facing enough, challenges that if you're picking a, good religious person and it just comes down to the way that they look or their family name or, the culture, it's really sad to see that we're pushing our youth away from halal relationships.
Yeah. Let me just add one thing on because I was mentioning about like how like women and girls are facing this dilemma, right? Because we have in our deen that the father of the girl is the wali, right? And this is a honorable title. This is not a derogatory thing, right? It's a meant to be honor for the father, that you are the guardian of your daughter, right? And you're watching out for her best interest. But like I talked about that, how they're in this like real dilemma many times, where there's no really good scenario. They have to exercise a really tough option, which is to seek help from outside or bypass their wali, right? In that extreme worst case scenario. Again, like I said, be very cautious of that, and there's steps to that. But there's also something on the guy's side that needs to be said, which is I this is something that came recently to my attention. I was talking to a friend about it, who shared this situation where like a guy and a girl got married, right? Both religious, mashallah, devoted to their faith. It seems like a great match from the outside. Like, wow, this is great. Two good families, two good people, mashallah, right? And then very shortly after, they get divorced. And then you're like just puzzled, like, what happened? That doesn't make any sense. And then as the details are revealed, like especially for someone like in like my position, I had to find out the details, right? In these unpleasant circumstances. It's like the family of the guy are literally manipulating the guy, right? Like they're it's like the guy is a little puppet, and the sister is pulling a string here, and the other brother is pulling a string here, and the mother is pulling a string here, and his hands are just moving, and he's saying, I divorce, almost like without his own accord, right? And I would say, bro, like, be a man. Not trying to be a meme here, right? But really, like, be a man. If you made that choice, stand up for your choice, and protect your house in a sense, right? Draw those boundaries. And if your family is being extremely like getting into your business, they're getting very nosy about your business, you have to draw a line, right? And not let that interfere. So this is on the guy side, unfortunately, that happens where the guy is very indecisive, and leaning almost like a crutch on his sister or his mother. And then when he gets married, he continues to lean on his sister and mother as like a crutch. But at that point, you have to now become like completely independent, right? So it's not to say that you cut off your family ties, of course not, right? But you have to remove any anything that could become a problem for your situation, for your relationship. Like the hadith of the Prophet goes, that la darara wa la dirar. This is a axiom in our religion, that harm cannot persist and cannot like just remain. It cannot be perpetuated. It cannot be reciprocated. And it cannot persist, right? So if you see harm, and this is the application of it comes a lot in family law, that your family is harming your wife, your family is compromising your marriage situation, then you have to draw a line uh, to insulate your wife and your nuclear family from that influence. So that's something on the guy side too, that yes, lean on your parents, lean on your family, but after a certain point you make your decision and you protect that decision. Otherwise it becomes a very, very, very unpleasant marriage and a very unpleasant ending, unfortunately.
I think, Sheikh Aarij, with that point that you just made, I think something that's really critical for anyone who's listening to think about is that if you're finding yourself in this situation where the parents are completely against you marrying their child, you have to realize that those parents aren't going anywhere, right? So even if you end up, forcefully marrying into a certain family, you have to live with that decision. So, I would caution that when there is that much friction and opposition to this union, you have to take a step back and say to yourself and really understand the reality of the situation. And don't, marry someone for the potential of what could happen. You have to understand that you will exist within this reality, and that will become your reality, right? So I think Sheikh Aarij bringing that point out is really, really critical. There are ways around it, and you may end up marrying this person, but you have to ask yourself, is this a situation that I want to be in? Because at the end of the day, I've seen it many times over. Your extended, in-law family can ruin or, really lift up a relationship or a marriage. And you have to understand, like Sheikh Aarij said, am I getting into a relationship where forcefully we're getting married and, my husband doesn't know how to draw the boundaries? Like, is this part of his personality? Are they going to allow him to draw the boundaries? Am I going to be living close to them? Do I recognize that my responsibility and his responsibility is that, God forbid, if something were to happen to them, they would be with us? So, or even let's say in your culture, do they live with you? Like, you have to consider all of these things when making that kind of decision. It's not just about what's right and wrong. It's also about what's best for you. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally.
And I think one of the assumptions that is made when people are in the situation is that they will be in a relationship till death, essentially, which is not always the case, because in some situations, like Sheikh Aarij mentioned, the people are compatible and they are religious, but for whatever reason they separate. And if you are someone who went against your family to marry a particular person, then who are you going to go to when the relationship ends, right? Like, is your family going to accept you at that point? If so, then, and if they have this controlling personality, then they're going to get to a point where they're going to be even more controlling and say, oh, look, you went against me last time. You see what happened? Now only listen to what I'm saying. And this is, like you said, it's a very unfortunate reality that happens within our communities. And like one of the key takeaways that I understood from this entire conversation was that it's really important to know your family dynamic, and based off of that, try to understand how you would proceed with a particular person. If your family dynamic is and open-minded to the degree where you can involve them from the get-go, and it doesn't mean that you're getting married to this person, then that works. If they're one that are a little bit more serious and they're very like hell bent on you getting into a relationship, then that means you should probably get to know a person first before involving a parents. And like you mentioned, if it gets to a point where you desperately need someone, then to involve allies, because otherwise the situation can get quite messy, and a person can get emotionally scarred from that as well. um I wanted to kind of pivot the conversation a little bit more into, and I think this sort of aligns with what Sheikh Aarij was mentioning, in that a person needs to be able to sort of set their boundaries and, like he eloquently put it, like be a man, right? Like, we had this conversation as well in the like the male and the female episode, in that what are some things that men and women should look for within themselves before actually thinking of marriage. And from the guy's side, like there was a little bit of debate as to like the financial stability aspect, because I personally think that a person should be either earning some sort of money or having projected to earn some sort of money by the time they're going to get married, right? And the thing is, by me saying that, this automatically disqualifies to some degree like people who are like, 18, 19, 20, who aren't like about to graduate, right? That this is something, this is a personal opinion, this is not like grounded in religion, I will just put that out there, this is a personal opinion. But the reality of the situation is, Islamically, men are the providers, right? And so the reason I have this opinion is because when women have a right upon you as a spouse to move out of move out of your family's house if they want to, and live under their own roof, right? But if you're a 19-year-old and you're still in second year, and you're not, and you're working like a part-time job at like the campus grocery store, like you're not going to be able to support your wife if she wants to live under a different roof for whatever reason. And so to sort of uplift that liability, that's why I think it's important for a person to be earning money, or be at a point where they're gonna have a guaranteed source of income. Like, let's say they're about to graduate next year and they have a job offer already. That's perfect, right? So that was one thing. And then the second thing we talked about, which was again the emotional maturity piece, as well as getting over some bad habits. And like, for example, in our Muslim community, like a lot of people have a tendency of, there's a lot of bad habits out there, there's more on the extremes, like, drinking, drugs, etc., etc., but there's also more subtle ones that really corrupt a person's mind, like pornography, for example, that can really affect like a person's intimate relationship with their spouse, especially in the context of marriage. And so we were just talking about like some of these things and what are the indicators that you should look for. So this was something that we talked about in the guys episode. Yasmin, you want to talk about what was talked about in the girls episode?
So we talked about some similar things, but we also mentioned that we women, like, we should be strong in our deen, and men should also be strong in their deen, and also akhlaq, like, and just be respectful in general. And another thing was, in with regards to maturity, just be aware of your surroundings, be have that ability to be aware of the environment, understand people and that kind of stuff, because a lot of people take advantage of women in general. So that's what in essence we talked about.
Sheikh Aarij, do you want to start this one off?
Sure, yeah. So I think everything about marriage, I think if you want to title this episode, it's like case by case. That's what we repeat that phrase a lot. It's case by case, right? But I would say, I said two things. One is that um, I think we have to kind of rethink of marriage as a community, starting from like the parent community down. Like if a 19-year-old says this, and it's like we should rethink, people will be like, you should rethink what you're doing. I think this should come from the parents down, which is, I think we have to kind of move away from marriage as it was for like even like people my age, alhamdulillah, right? Or older, and more towards marriage has to be now something that protects our young people from the haram that is so easily accessible. And it's always been there, but it's even more now, right? It's just inescapable almost, right? uh Marriage has to be a way to protect them from that. And you can't take chances in that situation. It's too in many ways is extremely risky. So what does that mean? That means a couple can get get married early, they have what's called their aqd qiran or their nikah ceremony done, but they don't immediately live together, and the man doesn't carry the burdens of providing immediately. They still live separately, but they can, still come together and be intimate like a couple and hang out together like a couple, right? And in these formative years, I think a lot of the, we're all rough around the edges as teenagers and, young adults. That would, in I think in many scenarios would allow that smoothing of the edges, in a more organic way, right? Like you grow up together in a way, right? And that helps. Excuse me. Of course, it's not perfect, right? It could go bad, it could go sour really fast, but I think the pros there are way more than the cons. And especially how easy it is for a person to just get sucked into the rabbit hole of pornography, right? Not to say that marriage is the get out of jail card, right? But loneliness, right? Loneliness really many times is what draws people into these vices, right? Um, and here you're filling the void of loneliness more than anything else. I mean, I remember when I was in university, I would not like hang out on campus at all. Like I would just go back home, right? And then when I made some friends, I would just hang out with my friends, in their homes, like because I was like I can't be around campus because there's just girls everywhere, right? Like I can't be in this environment. That was a personal choice. That was like not everybody felt that way, but that was me, right? I was like I gotta be take the class and get out of here. Helped I was in computer science. There was just very few women in my class anyway. But that's something that like it's difficult for people to do, right? Like you can't just live in that real binary way. But then if you're always lonely and all these temptations are around you, easy to get tempted and sucked in. So I would say this is like a solution for that, number one. And it's not unprecedented. Like like my grandfather, their generation, around they were 1920, they were married, right? It's not like unheard of. And I actually have friends who got married like when they graduated high school. Like both of them were like in grade 12 together, graduated high school, got married, and lived separately, but were married, and just slowly built their lives. So it's a good thing. And when I was in university, I kind of envied them in a good way, right? So that's number one. Number two is uh, about like when are you ready as a man, right? This is something that you hear quite a bit. Like I'm not ready yet, right? I was like, I don't know. You're a grown man. You should be ready for marriage in many ways. Uh, it's more of um, put it this way: you don't want to shove someone into this relationship if they don't want to be in it, but also at the same time you don't want a person to just kind of use that as an excuse, right? I think the Prophet said to us, young people, if you are able to get married, then get married, right? He said that you should get married, and it is a way for, like, he was explaining this to one Sahabi who was a young man, that tula'ibuha wa tula'ibuk, you would, be intimate and playful with each other. That companionship is so needed, right? That void that we will feel as a person is filled by that other spouse, right? So I would say is there, if you're trying to figure out when you're ready, I'm not sure if you're there's no like markers like, okay, I have to have this salary and I have to have this done and now I am ready. I think you're ready sooner in many cases than you realize. And that's a important first step, right? That doesn't mean immediately that you're ready to go propose to some girl. Right? Don't do that. It's like, you know what, I think I'm ready to knock on the door, would you marry me? Right? Don't do that, brother, please. But come to that emotional realization, and perhaps that will expedite the other things. Perhaps that will expedite your career, because you're like, you know what, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, I need to get there fast.
Right. Sister Sarah, what are your thoughts?
I definitely agree with Sheikh Aarij on the piece about community. So my parents individually told all six of us that at any point, we were in high school, mind you. Any of you want to get married, we will support you 100% financially. You just come to us, you let us know you want to get married. So this is something I would love to see more of in our communities, that when our child comes to us and feels that they are ready, that we don't allow something like finances, especially when we have finances, to be an obstacle for them. Like, to me, I just doesn't make any sense to me, the whole point about, withholding from our children when they're they need that support to do the right thing, right? In terms of the bigger question, I think to take a step back, how do I know I'm ready, or what do I have to look for in myself and someone else? I really, really have come to realize that self-awareness is critical. Marriage is, again, as Sheikh Aarij and myself have been saying, case by case. You have to really know yourself. What makes you happy? What brings out the best in you? Like, have you ever been around someone and you feel that they bring out good qualities in you, and then there's other people where you just feel like there's a different side of you that kind of shines, or when you're around that other type of person? I think you have to ask yourself, what kind of person does this person help me to become? What are the things that are critical for you? For me, for example, I knew that generosity was a big deal for me. If you were not generous, you and I would have a very difficult time living together. I can have friends who are not generous, but, to be day in and day out with someone who restricted me in something that, was integral in the house that I grew up in, and something that I believe is, really beautiful, there was going to be a conflict. Another thing for me specifically was my dad had died, Allah yarhamu. And we had a family business, and we were all very involved, and I supported my mom like with helping in that business, and we were all really, integrally involved. And if my husband wasn't willing to support that, we were going to have a problem. I was aware of that. Another thing I was aware of, that I was active in dawah. I needed somebody who was going to support me in that. If somebody was going to say to me every time I gave a halaqah, where are you going? What are you doing? Why are you leaving? This was going to make my life and my purpose very difficult. So, I really believe, and this came up when I was in teachers college. I lived with a girl who was Catholic, and she was getting married at the time, and she had to take a course with the priest about about marriage and compatibility, and they had to go through all of these answers and take a 1 year, I think, course together. And I think this is something the Muslim community really needs, like our masajid, our institutions need to adopt this sort of approach, because I think where we find ourselves in this, very turbulent times, is that, the piece that Sheikh Aarij spoke about, the intimacy and the companionship, it's a critical piece of our relationship. There's so many other pieces that we ignore that really either augment that relationship or, really destroy it. And things like, how do you communicate? How does this person respond when they're angry? So for me, I was really hyper-focused when I was coming to get married. I knew after certain experiences that had happened, this is what I don't want, this is what I do want. And so me personally, I know, like, at the time my husband did not appreciate it, was I had a really long list of questions, like very focused questions. So after I got over, could I see myself liking this person? Okay, now I got down to like business, because at the end of the day, I had to make sure we're on the same wavelength. Does that make sense? And I won't know that if I don't know, what triggers me, or what moves me, or what's going to make me feel fulfilled or happy. Do you see what I'm saying? So like things like, I asked things like, how do you explain predestination to your 12-year-old daughter? What would you do? What do you think the role of women is in dawah? There are lots of things that you have to kind of understand. Where is this person coming from? I understand those are questions specific to me, but you have to sit down and think about, what are the things that I value? What are the things that are important for me? And see, is this person on the same page as me? Are they going to be compatible with me? The other thing that I will say is, I remember this conversation with my dad, may Allah have mercy on him. I think I was like 16 or 17. And I said to him in Arabic, Baba, so dad, ادعي لي بالزوج الصالح. Make dua for me that I marry a righteous man. And he turned to me, and I wasn't doing anything bad, okay? Like I was pretty following the rules. And he turned to me and he said, Islahi min nafsik. So fix yourself, make yourself righteous, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send you who is righteous. And that has really, really stuck with me. So we all have to look at our own selves and ask ourselves, like, there's things we look for in our spouse, but do those things exist within you, right? And, at the very core of a successful relationship, there's good communication and sacrifice. Like, how much are you willing to sacrifice and make this relationship sort of work? And so that's why, like, with all of this advice that we're giving you and the points that Sheikh Aarij gave, you really have to go in, I believe, with eyes wide open. Like, until that moment where you sign that nikah, I always say this, you should be able to emotionally unplug. And if you had to break it off, you can break it off. Eyes wide open. After it, close one eye, right? After the marriage, after you've accepted this is your relationship, you have to make things work. You have to let things go. You have to, not be selfish anymore. But that period where you're getting to know someone and you're about to marry them, and Aarij, who gave me that advice about being selfish, Yahya. So he said to me, Sarrah, this is the one time in marriage, this is the one time in life where it's really important and critical that you become very selfish about this. Is you have to do what you think is best for yourself. Sometimes we find ourselves in these very compromising situations, but it's okay if we realize that we want to walk away from a situation because we've realized it doesn't work for us anymore, or it's not going to be what I thought it will be. And at the end of the day, dua, because whatever you know about someone, it's not the same as marrying them. Being married to someone is completely different than dating someone, than knowing someone, than hanging out with someone, being someone's friend. Those are totally different experiences. So at the end of the day, you have to have good self-awareness. You have to have, of course, if possible, the support of your family. And you have to keep your eyes, really wide open about yourself and about someone else. And you have to be fair in that assessment, right? Don't ask of something from someone when you're not doing it. Like, don't look for these things and people and you're okay with it not being something that you possess. And would you want to be somebody that somebody wants to marry? Like, you have to ask yourself these important questions. Sorry, I kept talking. I will let you.
No, I think you made some really, really good points. And especially the last thing that you mentioned with that, you need to see if you have these qualities within yourself. Because going back to the Bollywood drama Sheikh Aarij mentioned earlier, there's a tendency from the guy's side, like mothers usually look for pious daughter-in-laws so that they can come and fix their son. Right. And this is like completely, in my opinion, a completely backward mentality, because that can't happen. That's just fostering, and that's a foundation for a non-fruitful relationship. And to your point, like I think self-reflection is extremely important.
Also oppressive, Faizan. It's
Oh,
very
yes.
fear Allah in these relationships.
Yeah.
Because we also have daughters, right? Like, you have sons, you have daughters. Would you accept that for your daughter? So you have to be careful what you do. افعل ما شئت, do whatever you want. كما تدين تدان. One day this comes back to you. So if you wouldn't accept that for your daughter, you sure shouldn't accept it for someone else's daughter, right?
100%, yeah. And I think another thing you mentioned that was actually really important was compatibility. I think we forget that religious compatibility is different than character compatibility. And I think Muslims often get really blinded by, like, oh, are they good Muslims? Like, do they pray 5 times a day? Like, that's it, done deal, right? But there's actually a lot more that goes into like a relationship. And I feel like there's a lot of like even like resources that aren't grounded in like Islam that we can use and we can leverage to make our relationships better, more fruitful, more healthy. But for some reason, a lot of people don't actually consider this. And I wanted to use this as a segue to something you actually mentioned, and wanted to talk a little bit more about like the whole emotional attachment piece, right? And so something you mentioned was your personality was one where you were more direct with your questions, and you wanted to understand if this person was going to be someone who you could envision a potential future with, right? But after talking to some of the guys on the episode that we did for the male singles, there was a little bit of disconnect between actually being a little bit emotionally attached, and the example they gave was like you're going into like you're going into a sea and you have to dip your feet just like a little bit, but it's like, when do you know when to stop dipping your feet? And the dipping your feet is like getting emotionally attached to that person. And I understand where they're coming from, and I understand the logic that they have, because marriage is, at the end of the day, it is partially an emotional decision. It isn't just like, buying a stock and seeing like what is going to be the greatest financial return. It is, you're sharing your life with somebody, right? And so I understood their point of view, and I get that. And there was a lot like, oh, if you're super direct with someone, they're just gonna like run away, because if you come on like the second meeting and you're just like, okay, how are we going to split the bills, what are you going to do for a living, do you volunteer at a mosque or not, like if you're doing that, then you're coming off as like really really strong. And I'm not implying that was you, but I hope you get the idea I'm trying to portray, right? And so I guess the question, or sort of the comment, unless Yasmin wants to add something from the female episode, is that like, to what degree should you get emotionally attached? How should you navigate this? Because again, it is a partial, if not a lot of an emotional decision, and there's a lot of emotions involved, obviously, with marriage.
I really believe strongly that marriage has to be a rational decision. And I think that once you compromise that, you either need someone else helping you with that decision, because you have to understand that you've got a big blind spot. And I think that what ends up happening is that certain compromises will happen, because you have that emotional attachment. You start wanting to see things the way that you want to see them. And then suddenly you said you were dipping your feet, but now you're drowning, right? And you wonder, well, how did I get to this point, or how did I get to this state? And I really, 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 as strong as possible, would advise that if you are in an emotionally attached relationship, step away. We have certain principles that should bring our hearts to rest. You are not going to, Faizan, marry somebody else's wife. You will only marry your wife, what is written for you, right? And if we believe in these principles wholeheartedly, and we have full trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, stepping away won't make the difference. The only thing that it does is helps us to clarify that foggy sort of, cloud over our minds that's not helping us see properly. And when we make decisions, there has to be two elements. There's istishara, which is asking people for advice, and istikhara, and asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for advice. In both of those, when you are emotionally attached, it's affected. So when you have istikhara and you have a dream, you will only interpret the dream or the feeling. Like, people think you have to have a dream. No, I'll let Sheikh Aarij talk about the fiqh of it or whatever. But like, what I'm saying is, and what I've seen is, people, no matter what a sheikh will say to them, they'll say, no, this is how my dream actually means. This is what I felt. They want to interpret it a certain way. The same happens with when you ask people for advice. Well, they don't really know him properly, or they don't know him the way that I know him, when they're hearing things that should be concerning to them. So I would strongly, strongly, strongly advise that if you find yourself making an emotional decision, give yourself some space. Take that time, step away, come outside of the box, try to look at the bigger picture, and try to understand, am I making a decision that is swayed by my emotions? Because at the end of the day, Yasmin, Faizan, your emotions will change. They will change. I guarantee you they will change. And they will change based on some important, like the first time my husband came to see me, the great thing about, alhamdulillah, with my husband is I actually didn't want to see him or meet him. Like, I had come to a point where I was sick of seeing people. And when you don't want to meet someone, you have no interest in showing them a certain nice side of you or the happy side or whatever it is. You don't care. Like, you don't care if it works or it doesn't work. And that's actually what made this really special, because I didn't want to meet him and I didn't want to see him. But I believe in giving every person a chance that meets a certain like religious criteria or what I'm looking for. At the end of the day, my point in this was that you find yourself, when you're not cloudy and you're not fogged by all these dreams of what will be, you find yourself dealing with very concrete, data points. He is kind because, and I can list the reasons. He is generous because, he is supportive because. And I find myself not trying to fill in the gaps or make excuses. What I found really concerning is when my friends would find themselves in these very difficult marriages. And like, I had a friend, for example, whose husband would say to her, "You're not allowed to spend more than $500 a month." But he was a very well-off physician, extremely restrictive. When I said to her, "Well, what happened? Like, were there not any signs?" She said, "I guess when I look back in the engagement, this happened. And I guess this happened." And this is why I really like, my advice to all of you people is find someone you trust. It may not be your parents. I will accept that. It may not be that your parents are going to give you good advice, but you find that person, and it may well be your parents. Find that person you trust and tell them everything that's going on. Do you think there is anything I should be concerned about? And they will hopefully have the wisdom to say to you, this is a red flag. You need to pay attention to this. You need to test this further. How is this person when they're angry? How is this person when they're disappointed? They don't get what they want. What happens? How does this person deal with certain hardships? Because at the end of the day, Corona is a great example of the fact that you live with your decision, right? We are stuck in a house together. And for some people, they're saying these are the best days of our lives. Okay, I'm not going to make it flowery. Like, these are like such a blessing that we get to be together. And for other people, we're hearing a lot of, I'm miserable. I can't be around my spouse for too long. I don't want to be in the same room with them for this long. And, you have to ask yourself, well, where did the breakdown happen, right? And a lot of times it goes back to the fact that, people made very emotional decisions when they were deciding, this is the person I want to spend the rest of my existence with. So as much as I love and believe that there has to be this, emotional attachment between people, I think that comes. And I think that that's nurtured with respect and compatibility and good communication and sacrifice and love for each other. And I think that if you depend on that in the beginning, or you allow it to cloud you, because it inevitably will, you may find yourself making a very wrong decision that will affect you and other people for a very long time.
Yeah, and how many people that I think I know personally, Sarah, you would also know them personally. You will also know them in your life that made that decision or were forced in that decision by circumstances, and now the marriage is just really like they're just living in the same house. Really, there's not anything more to it than that, right? And that's one of the worst outcomes. One of the worst outcomes you could have is that, unfortunately. Everything we spoke about what marriage means, that's the exact opposite of, right? So it's very critical to have that like Sister Sarah was saying, eyes wide open before, right? Approach and being assertive and selfish, to the point of being selfish, right? About, this is my decision, I'm gonna have to live with it for the rest of my life, essentially, right? Very, very critical to have that. And just one thing is that like there's many things in the deen that are there as protective measures, because Allah knows us better than ourselves. They're there to protect us from our own selves, from the pitfalls of our imaginations, right? And the gender interaction guidelines, the framework that the Sharia gives us, is exactly for that reason. Like, think about this. The shahada is like an exclusive thing. La ilaha illallah, right? There is no God worthy of worship except Allah, right? That idea applies in in life, Islamically, only to marriage. You are only married to this person. You're not married to anyone but this person. You're only going to be intimate with this person and no one else, right? Transactions or business and whatnot, everything is permissible unless something can be, highlighted or marked as impermissible, right? But in that vast like realm, you have this one type of transaction, marriage, that acts like the way the shahada acts, right? That should tell you how different it is than anything else you're going to do in life, and how carefully you must consider when you make this choice. And one thing I remember, that the Prophet said is, this is for guys, because you might end up, like liking the same girl, right? Two guys end up liking the same girl, uh, and that becomes like an interesting situation, right? What happens if your best friend marries the girl that you wanted to marry, right? uh, Now, the one of the things the Prophet teaches us is that don't bid on top of your brother's bid, right? This is something that's applied to Islamic transactions and finance, but also applies to marriages. If a guy is already engaged in a serious conversation, right, or is trying to get married to somebody and they're trying to find a way, don't sidestep them and kind of just like, get there first. Just respect them, let them be, and pray istikhara. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for goodness. Istikhara means seeking khair, actually, linguistically, right? Seek that khair from Allah and He'll give you khair. There's, was'alullaha min fadlihi, like Allah says about in the Quran, that ask Allah for His grace, His bounty. It's limitless, right? Don't get caught up emotionally attached to that one individual, that one possibility, to the point that it sours you. No, just like those guidelines of the Sharia are there to protect us. Understand Allah's grace and bounty is limitless, and just keep asking for that grace and bounty, and respect the rules that the Prophet has laid out. It's better for us, firstly and foremostly for the individual who implements them and enacts them, right? So it's very, very important not to fall in that trap, uh, and keep those two eyes wide open. But once you're married now, right, there's a lot more forgiveness required. Like that one eye closed, that's a beautiful analogy. A lot more forgiveness is required, a lot more like malleability is required on both parties, right? Because you have to kind of learn to like live together, right? And it's like, I don't know, I'm surrounded by Play-Doh all the time, so I'm thinking always in Play-Doh terms, right? It's like two Play-Doh like uh balls are coming together, and if they're too hard, it's gonna be like a crunchy mess, right? But you gotta be able to come mix them together and make something special, inshallah.
Yeah, I thought you were saying Plato, like the philosopher, for a while until you said like the two balls, and I'm like, okay, I think I understand now.
I was talking about Play-Doh. Yes, and here is a live demonstration of Play-Doh. Thank you, Mariam. Appreciate
So
that.
something my brother actually said to me that really helped me was, he said, Sarah, people are not good or bad, they're good and bad. And usually people are 70% good, 30% bad. But the question is, what is that 30%, right? What are the qualities that fill that 30%? When you think about, there are certain qualities that are very destructive to individuals or to relationships, right? So some people, for example, can't don't deal well with a temper or somebody that yells. They completely shut down. So speaking to what Sheikh Aarij was saying, yeah, like you really have to think about the fact that there's a lot to consider when you're making this decision. And when you find yourself, stuck in this sort of emotional, I don't know what it is, but it's like
trance.
Yeah, you find it really hard to see clearly. And what I love about istikhara and feeling like you've made a decision based on sound principles is that when you find, because marriages will go through ups and downs. So if anyone tells you that their marriage is great all the time, no, that's not true. Great marriages are because there are people that are willing to work through it and support each other and be there for each other and not give up, right? This is how that great marriage kind of happens. And if you find yourself in that turbulent time, you go back to the fact that, you know what, I did this right as best as I could. And I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like Sheikh Aarij said, for khair. And this is what Allah gave me. So it helps you to be more patient. Does that make sense? It helps you that you didn't start off cloudy so that when things do get cloudy, it becomes your clarity again. The fact that you went into this with good intentions in the proper way, trying to find, what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trying to fulfill what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Aarij, your kids are so cute, mashallah.
Thank you.
Right.
Assalamualaikum.
We can say so.
Walaikum assalam. Sorry we took your dad from you.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. Like you mentioned, you sort of you kind of reaffirm your choice in a way because you know that the choice you made and the process you made, the process you took to make that choice was the best possible process. And so, yeah, I really appreciate that point. And I think something you mentioned that I had a follow-up question on. One sort of follow-up question I had was on the topic of selfishness. Like I understand where you're coming from, and the example I'd give is so Sheikh Aarij did this Q&A for the MSA, and one of the questions asked there was marrying a revert Muslim, right? And so when we talk about selfishness versus flexibility in a context such as that, like I know there's no right or wrong answer to this, but like can we like have a discussion on how selfish should you be? And some people have a mindset of like not saving somebody, but kind of like a growth mindset, right? So if there is a person that they are considering and perhaps they're trying their best to pray, whereas you're a person who already prays all 5 times a day, or like something along those lines, or in the context of a revert Muslim, like they're still learning, right? And they're still trying to understand the faith and they're still grasping. So to what degree should you be selfish, quote unquote, versus being able to give a little bit of leeway, knowing that you are going to have ups and downs when it comes to like faith, but you have to be like a support system for them? Because hypothetically, if everyone that comes to them is selfish, then that could backfire in a much more grandiose scale, in that if they see like, okay, like I'm never going to get married to a righteous Muslim man, what's the point of even pursuing, or what is even the point of staying committed to this faith, right? I know that's an extreme example, but I hope that you understand like the point I'm trying to make in the question I have with regards to selfishness and flexibility.
So you're asking me, is that what you were saying, Faizan?
Open to anybody.
Okay. Aarij, you want to take a stab at that?
No, I think like I'd like you to please like start
Okay.
and then I'll add something, inshallah.
Okay. So I'm just going to give a blanket statement. I generally say your spouse should not be your dawah project. Okay. So this is something that I think everybody should try to live by as a blanket sort of approach to marriage. I don't think you should marry someone on the potential of what they will become. I think you have to marry someone knowing that I have to accept that they may never change, right? Change is actually a very difficult thing. So they haven't changed for 25 years. Most likely they may not change. So you have to accept that. So if they didn't change, alhamdulillah, I've seen a lot of change in my spouse and myself from each other. And that's great. But I think we have to bank on the fact that what if they don't change? Like, this is what I'm with. This is who this person is. Are we compatible? Can I live with their challenges? Can they live with my challenges? Now, I think you bring up a very important point, the idea of reverts. So they are a responsibility in our community, absolutely. I think one of the difficult things that we're finding is that there are many reverts who revert back, right? And what we're finding is a big part of it was not Islam, it was Muslims, right? As Muslims, as a community, we did not support these people. We did not help them in their growth and in their understanding. So it is definitely a challenge that our institutions have to, start talking about more openly and figuring out concrete ways of how we're going to support the revert community. Now, let me put myself in the position of a parent. So let's say my child came to me and said, I want to marry a revert, and, they may not be religious or they're not praying. I think what I would say to my child at that point is, let's give it some time. So let's help this person. Let's bring this person into our family. Let's support this person. But I think there's certain minimums. It's not so much like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran to test them, right? To test them, meaning that, we ensure that the faith is there. It's not so much the practices as much, Faizan, because a lot of us have these practices because we grew up in it, because we were nurtured. So I get the piece that they may not have that, and that has to come from us. So I'm okay with all of that. I think the piece that I would just have to be, work out, and because there, reverts, there's such a broad spectrum. Like Sheikh Suhaib is a revert, Hamza Yusuf is a revert. Like there's so many reverts that, in our world where you go from, leaving Islam to being somewhat religious, to having proper understanding, to going to being Shuyookh, right? So I think what has to happen is you have to understand on a case, this more than anything is a case by case. But I would not say, no, we should be turning away reverts. I get that they will be a little less than us in our understanding, perhaps. But I think what you have to keep in mind, Yasmin and Faizan and everyone who's listening, is at the end of the day, this person is the person who's raising your children, whether father or mother. This is the person that you are going to need in your moments of being low, sometimes spiritually and emotionally. Like that's the reality. You're going to go through these roller coasters and ups and downs. And so your spouse has to be that person for you too. But it's tricky because I do believe that we can't just abandon the revert community. Like, so my solution is to find a middle ground. Like, let's find a way to support them, to see, how can we support their religious growth? And you see at that point, does this work for you? Does it work for your needs? Does it work for your family? Sheikh Aarij, you probably have way more insight into that.
No, that's actually, I really like how you framed it. I'm just gonna go a little more broader than that, just not specifically on the topic of revert, because you can have people who are, who were born into a Muslim family that aren't so, devoted to Islam, and then a person who's really devoted is marrying them, right? And then there's all these problems that arise as a result of the two not being on the same page, right? And it could go from like small things, like small matters where, for example, like like say a guy who's not very religious marries a girl who is more devoted, right? And he's like hugging his cousins and whatnot, like girl cousins, and the girl's like, well, she's not your mahram, you can't do that, right? Not to say that's like you're condoning that, but it's not, it's like it's a solvable thing. To like something really bad where the guy's drinking alcohol on the side and like he's high and whatnot, and the girl is a good devoted lady, and now she's like, what do I do with this guy, right? No one knew about this and no one told me about it, right? She's completely blindsided. And like to a point, Faizan, like a lot of these times, like these moms push their sons into these relationships, like inshallah he'll get better with this girl, and then miskina, she's the one who's stuck with him and struggling. It's not ideal. So you have these circumstances, like irrespective of whether the person was born Muslim or not, right? What I would just say is that the worldviews of the two people has to match, right? They should view the world and the next world the same way. And if the practice of the faith is up and down, right, then all that can kind of just sort itself out. But as long as you see the world the same way, right? Like I see the world as, this is a temporary life and my permanent home is in Jannah, inshallah. And I want someone who can help me in that process or be with me in that process, right? And for me, what matters not so much is, like frivolous entertainment. What matters more is being a good Muslim, right? These are, if the worldviews match, then I think it's easy, right? Like a person, uh, I can count so many examples of people who, like they had the same worldview, but one was much less practicing, not even praying sometimes, and the other was. And then over time, like they went for Umrah, they went for Hajj, the girl starts wearing hijab, the guy starts to grow a beard, right? And alhamdulillah, like hearts are in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like he turns them in the right direction. But the key is that the worldview was the same. I think that's like the common denominator. So that really is the case, right? Like if you are trying to hold a person to scrutiny about like, okay, a lot of times guys are like this. Oh, she wears hijab, she prays 5 times a day, and I heard her read Quran, and I'm smitten. Like, bro, there's more.
No, that's a very real reality, unfortunately, and they completely ignore the chemistry part.
All right.
No, but I think an important point, Sheikh Aarij, that he's like Faizan, that Sheikh Aarij is making is that like even chemistry obviously is very important, but deen is not necessarily
just actions,
just by the outward. Does that make sense? So for us, the understanding of deen is in your akhlaq, your khuluq. Yani, how do you interact with people? Deen is between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your akhlaq is, how do I translate my understanding of my relationship with God into my interactions in the day-to-day with other people? And if there is a disconnect with the khuluq piece, there's definitely a disconnect with the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala piece. So like I think one thing, and Jazakallah khair Sheikh Aarij for bringing this up, is that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yuqallibul qulub. Yani he is the one who changes the hearts. And I have seen people, who have become probably the best Muslims that I have ever met, who you may have seen in university in clubs or bars or other things. Like there is definitely the understanding that people for sure can change. I think my point was just, we have to understand that they may not change as well. Like that's something you have to accept. But I think something for take home for people is the piece about, your outward actions and how you interact with people. When Aisha radiallahu anha described the Prophet, she said, "Kana khuluquhu al-Quran." Yani his character was the Quran. It's as if you see the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the spirit behind those laws walking on this earth, right? And so oftentimes there are brothers who will meet a sister and she doesn't wear hijab and he wants to bring her home to a religious family. And wallahi, that girl is better than many, many other girls that I know. And, it's a matter of her having a higher level of understanding that may come, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guiding her heart to certain things. And you find this person that on the outside you may see as, like you're saying, not as practicing or not religious, who, mashallah, is much, much, much more sincere, much more connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's just a matter of, certain things being developed within that person, whether female or male, right? So I think this was a really critical point that Sheikh Aarij, brought up.
I just want to clarify one thing. I think maybe just as we're bouncing these ideas off each other, it's a really beautiful point about, how there's an expectation of change, but also you have to accept they may not change, right? I think maybe if you think about this, like thinking out loud here, like what are like indicators of change, like or the probability of positive change happening. What are the indicators of that, right? I think one of them is definitely how is this person's akhlaq, right? If this person has good akhlaq, really like, encapsulating what the Prophet called makarimul akhlaq, like, truly like honorable characteristics, then that is a great indicator, right? That their day-to-day religiosity can evolve, right? Another indicator is like that whole idea about like the worldview, right? Like say like a person doesn't pray, right? But they're like, you know what? I should be praying. I know I'm doing something wrong, right? Like they know it's not right. They're not justifying that, right? As if it's not important. Like, yeah, I should do it. You're right. But so their worldview is intact, right? That is a key piece, even in relationships. Like Sarah was saying, like someone is like in a club and then they turn over time into like a devoted Muslim. Like there's people I know they were Muslim boy girl dating in high school. They knew something. There was limits to that dating. They were like, we can't do zina, right? But we'll be an item, right? And then they get married and they have children, and the children are in Islamic school. The girl's wearing hijab now, mashallah, right? Guys has a beard. So the indicator of change, I think, in my opinion, was that their worldview was the same. They were like, yeah, it's wrong, not to justify or condone it, but they at least recognize it was wrong, right? And that, I think maybe that and akhlaq and some other things could be indicators of positive change. So maybe you look for that, not specifically like a checklist of 5 times a day, 30 just memorized,
Right. So
You
I
would
think
think, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, like, I think thank you both for sharing that, because I think now what I took away, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that faith is something that is deeply personal to an individual level, and it shouldn't be judged solely off of outward actions or whether they're doing certain things. So the example you gave was wearing the hijab or praying 5 times a day, but it's more about how they view religion and what is like their understanding of it and what is their connection to it, because if that is intact and if that is in line in terms of how you view the world, as Sheikh Aarij put it, then I think the actions will follow. And one of the key indicators you mentioned for that is that it starts with a person's character, and if that is lacking, then that might be a potential red flag in their ability to translate that faith into actions down the road. If anyone else has any like last minute tips or advice on like anything that we talked about, feel free. The floor is all yours. If not, then I know we've been here for more than an hour and a half, so I don't want to keep you for any longer. Going once, going twice.
I was just gonna say one thing.
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's a beautiful passage in the Quran in Surah number 28, Surah Qasas, which describes Musa alayhi salam getting married, right? So all you lonely people out there, I'm joking. That's a passage everybody should study, right? But that has a very beautiful dua, right? A very powerful supplication that Musa alayhi salam made, and there's many lessons from how he got married. But that, above everything else, that supplication for anyone who's in need of anything, that supplication is beautiful. But particularly for somebody who's trying to find that one for them, right, and doing it for the right reason, and has their heart in the right place, and wants to do this for the sake of Allah, that's your dua. That's the one you make like from the bottom of your heart, sincerely, right? The actual number of the ayah, I'll look it up for you. I'll tell you right now. But the dua goes, Rabbi inni lima anzalta ilayya min khairin faqir. Right? This is ayah number 24. So Surah 28, ayah 24. Right? This is the dua. My Lord, I'm truly in need of whatever blessing you may send down for me. And faqir is like extremely needy of this, right? So it shows our dependence on Allah. And after Musa made this, he got married. So hey, bro, good precedence.
That's gonna be every dua. That's gonna be the thing I read before going to sleep every night from now.
There you go.
No, honestly, Jazakallah khair for sharing that piece of advice, and Jazakallah khair in general to Sheikh Aarij and Sister Sarah for, the hour and a half of words of wisdom, because this was really, really helpful for me, especially, and I'm sure anyone who's watching this. And I definitely learned a lot just by sitting in and listening to the two of you. So I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, Jazakallah khair for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here, and Jazakallah khair for coming on our podcast. Inshallah, this isn't the last time we'll have you on. And yeah, Jazakallah khair once again.
Yeah. Inshallah, may Allah accept from us all, inshallah.
I mean. Thank you, everybody. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.